Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this Textile Talk podcast. I'm Gail Cowley, and I'll be your host today. Joining me is Sarah de Rousset-Hall, who is a hand embroidery artist and teacher. Just to give you a little bit about a background on Sarah before we start our chat. Sarah works as a tutor for the Royal School of Needlework and runs her own embroidery business called Sarah Stitches. She came to embroidery as a second career, but has been embroidering as long as she can remember. Following on from a cancer diagnosis when she was aged 30, she returned to being a student a few years later to turn her hobby into a profession. Sarah graduated from RSN's Future Tutor programme in 2020 and has been working as a professional embroiderer ever since, teaching, developing kits and working on art pieces and commissions. In 2021, she became a Liveryman of the Worshipful Company of Broderers and a Freeman of the City of London. In 2022, Sarah exhibited 3 art pieces at Broderers Exhibition, the Art of Embroidery at the Bankside Gallery in London, and she's currently working on pieces for their next exhibition in 2025. In 2023, Sarah was honoured to be part of the embroidery studio team at the Royal School of Needlework, who worked on a number of items for the coronation of their Majesties, King Charles III and Queen Camilla, including the Queen's robe of estate, the anointing screen and the stole royal. Sarah lives in West Sussex with her husband and has 2 cats who occasionally make appearances in her online classes. Thank you so much, Sarah, for agreeing to come onto the podcast. I'm really delighted to be able to speak to you this morning. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
So the first thing that I would like to ask is if you could give us a little bit of an introduction to you, about your background perhaps, and how you came to needlecraft would be a really useful way of setting the scene for our listeners.
Okay, so I'm Sarah de Rousset-Hall. I am an embroidery artist and teacher, and I live down in West Sussex. I came to embroidery as a second career. So before doing my training at the Royal School of Needlework, I used to work in the corporate world. So I ended up in IT procurement for large international corporations, which was, I was quite good at it and it was rather fun, but not terribly creatively engaging. So when I was 30, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that sort of somewhat shifted my perspective on life, shall we say.
I'm sure.
So I went back to work. I had 18 months off for my treatment. And during that time, I'd always done embroidery as a hobby, but I picked up cross stitch to do whilst I was having my treatment because it gave me something to do, but it wasn't exhausting. And it just became something that I kept doing from then onwards. If I wasn't in work, and sometimes when I was in work, I would have I would have a hoop with me, and that was how I used to relax at the end of a stressful day. So it became a bigger and bigger part of my life. And a few years later, I finished my treatment. I went back to work. I threw myself back into work. And unsurprisingly, I burnt myself out. And at that point, I was like, I can't do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I need to change something about my life. And the obvious choice was embroidery. And it so happened that I went to a class at the RSN with one of our fabulous tutors, Shelley Cox. It was a 3-day white work class. I dragged my sister along, but it was the best decision I ever made because my sister, being the wonderful lady that she is, found a flyer for the Future Tutors program, and she went, "Sarah, you should do this." And I said, "Don't be ridiculous, Kate. I have a mortgage. I can't possibly go and do something like that." But I'd really, really enjoyed the class. I'd always enjoyed embroidery. I was getting more and more into it. And it was one of those things that it just sort of stuck with me. And over the sort of the next few months, I was like, actually, I think this is a really, really good idea. It will give me a break. It will give me creative outlet, and I think I could be really good at it in that sort of slightly naive way that sometimes you approach things. And so yeah, I quit my job. Well, I applied first and got into the program, but I quit my job. I was living in Ireland at the time, so we moved back from Dublin to London to start the course. And yeah, that's how it all began, really.
My goodness. It's so interesting to hear from you that you came to it. Not that I think 30s later in life, but it isn't straight from school, is it? It isn't straight from sort of full-time education into training as such. A change of pace for you.
It was. So by the time I started on the course, I was 36. So yeah, cancer diagnosis at 30. A few years later, I started the course. And yeah, it was quite a big transition, because it had been a long time since I was a student, and I was used to being the expert in the room. I had a successful career. I was good at it. I was often the person that people would turn to ask the awkward and complicated questions. And then all of a sudden, I'm not working. Well, I'm still working quite long hours, but not as much as I was in the corporate world. But I'm the apprentice. I'm the student. I'm the one who knows nothing. And that was, yeah, it was a tricky transition. I'm sure my tutors who were there at the time would probably have some more to say about that as well. But yeah, it was pretty tough to go from being the expert to the person who knows nothing.
Yeah, I do know a little about that myself, to be honest, because I went from being a City and Guilds tutor into doing both foundation degree in art and design, and then going on to do a degree in design. And it's a very different emphasis, very different. And as you say, I was often the one, they suspected I actually might technically know more than them. And they made life really quite difficult for me. Some did, and some said, "Oh, Gail, can you carry on and take this class?" So it was a very strange, a very weird transition, sort of in my 30s, in my early 30s. It was odd. So I completely understand where you're coming from with it.
Yeah, it was, but I still say it's the best decision I ever made. It was scary as well to, half our income and make a big transition in terms of moving house and everything, but I don't regret it for a second.
That's great, isn't it? Because again, I think it's something that a lot of the students that come to us for courses are thinking about doing. They're thinking about making that move. Often, perhaps, it can be a different trigger for everyone, but sometimes it's when they've perhaps had children are young, and they've taken a bit of a break. They've perhaps picked up some embroidery or some knitting or whatever in the evenings when they have to be in, and then they start and think about making that move. But as you say, it's scary.
It is very scary, and it's hard as well. Making a living as a creative professional is not easy, and you have to work to find work. And if I'd always worked for a company. I had a monthly paycheck. Everything was quite predictable in that sense. And then suddenly shifting to being effectively, then a student and then a freelancer, it's a very, very different mindset of, I can't just rely on the fact that but at the end of the month my pay is going to come in. Everything has to be a little bit more carefully sort of thought through and planned, so that you can carry on.
Yes, so that you're able to eat at the end of the month. So just to sort of go back a little bit to the future tutor training.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little about that? How long were you there for, and what sort of things did you cover?
Yeah, so the Future Tutors programme was the replacement for the original apprenticeship course at the RSN, which ran for a very long time. It's actually just being reformulated at the moment, so it's relaunching this September as the professional embroidery training from the RSN. But it's the Future Tutors programme, as I did it, was a 3-year full-time course. And when they said full-time, they meant full-time. So I was in Hampton Court Palace 3 days a week. So usually that was Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And that would be when we'd be in class doing techniques. But I was stitching, usually 6 days a week. I'd usually take one day off a week. But yeah, it's pretty intense. I mean, I came from a corporate background where working a 60-hour week wasn't necessarily unusual. So for me, it wasn't such a big transition, but for other folks, I know it was. Yeah, I was a bit of a workaholic previously, but which weirdly was helpful. And yeah, and we started off basically the first 2 years, you're covering all of the sort of the classic Royal School of Needlework techniques. So we started with Jacobean crewel work. We did canvas work, silk shading, gold work, white work, stump work. What else? Oh, so many. Box making, tassel making. Thinking black work. Look, I'm literally looking around at my pieces. Black work, everything. And we do those intensively in 2 years. So all of the techniques. So the RSN also has the certificate and diploma program. So we do every technique that is available through that. So certificate, diploma, advanced diploma, and then a few additional ones on top of that. Things like both sides alike was a technique that we covered as well, which does what it says on the tin. Fine white work. So yeah, so a large number of techniques in a relatively compressed amount of time. And then we'd also do art classes on business skills. We do trips to museums and galleries to look at things. We do research on the techniques. So yeah, so pretty intensive, writing up what we call teaching files. So details about the stitches we'd learnt, the types of techniques, drawing diagrams and things like that. So yeah, those 2 years were very much focused on the stitch techniques and starting to build up that technical knowledge. Mm-hmm. We also did a little bit of teacher training in the beginning. For me, it was the beginning of my second year, which was really useful in terms of how to convert what you've learnt into then being able to pass that on to other people.
Yeah.
In terms of a higher education sort of training perspective. And then in our third year, we were mostly in the RSN studio. So that's also at Hampton Court Palace. So that is the RSN's commercial studio. And that time we were focusing on things like working in a commercial environment. So building up your speed so that you can work in a commercial time frame, looking at things like conservation, restoration, how to clean wedding veils, how to repair net, how to repair canvas, using vintage threads as well. Mm-hmm. So that if you're working on a historical piece, you're not necessarily using new threads because they need to have that sort of look that fits in. So we have the wall of wool in the studio, which is where we go in and we pick out sort of vintage threads to use to blend into initial pieces. So it was very different. A different change of pace, and it was great because we're often working on pieces from a lot of the time they're pieces from the RSN collection, so repairing them, conserving them, cleaning them, but also occasionally we did get to work on some of the pieces that came in to the RSN studio. So we worked on a piece which was a repair of a chair. So it was a silk shaded chair, and it was for a TV program, which was for the salvage hunters, the restorers. So it was a bon marché chair, and we did the embroidery, or we were part of the team that worked on the embroidery for that to have that chair restored, which was really great fun to work on.
Oh, I'm sure it was. I believe you've also worked on some royal commissions as well.
I have, yes. I was extremely honoured last year to work on 3 pieces that the RSM studio worked on for the coronation of King Charles and Queen Camilla. So I worked on the anointing screen. I did some work on the stole royal, which was a cloth of gold stole. That was the piece that was handed over to the king by Prince William during the coronation. And I also got to work on Queen Camilla's robe of estate, so the beautiful purple velvet gold worked robe. So it was an amazing experience. Yeah, truly honoured to have been part of it. Yeah, just a fabulous time.
I'm sure, because we were all glued to the screen, weren't we? And we all saw the details as they came out and had them explained to us. You must have been absolutely, so proud.
So proud. I was lucky enough as well. So the stitching team were invited to attend the coronation. We weren't in the Abbey. We were out of the front of Buckingham Palace. So we got to see the King and Queen leave and then come back again afterwards. And we got to see them on the balcony as well. And that was really lovely because there were about 20 of us on the day there. So yeah,
Lovely.
it was just amazing. Also to see everybody and hang out and celebrate what we'd achieved.
Oh, I'm sure. If memory serves me correctly, didn't it rain that day?
It did, yes.
How did you go on?
So we all decided to get dressed up in our posh frocks, and then no one saw them because we were in our waterproof jackets the entire day. Luckily, we'd all noticed there was a WhatsApp group. We all noticed the weather forecast. We brought all our waterproof gear, and they also handed out ponchos to the crowd when we were there, which I was very appreciative of.
I do remember that. So I guess it's not a great day to be in front of Buckingham Palace, but I'm sure that your pride in the occasion would overcome.
It was totally worth it.
I bet it was. So just one of the things that occurs to me as you're talking about commercial studio work, it must be, and you're talking about building up speed. How do you do that? Because I suppose a lot of the listeners will think of embroidery being something that is very time consuming, which it is, but perhaps not something that you can massively increase your speed with.
Yeah. So what I would say is speed comes with practice. The more you do, the easier it gets. I'm not necessarily physically moving faster than another, like a good amateur embroiderer. What it is the muscle memory to be able to, when I bring my needle up, 9 times out of 10, it's where I'm looking at the fabric. And that changed from when I started out, probably 2 times out of 10. When I bring the needle up and it's there and it's ready to go. The other thing is I work two-handed most of the time. So I have I'm right-handed, so I have my right hand underneath a frame and my left hand on top. So I'm catching the needle, so I'm not moving my shoulder around all the time. And that also is one of the reasons why we can work quicker. So yeah, it's not necessarily that I'm physically stitching faster, it's that my needle is where I expect it to be and I'm working two-handed. But the key is practice. It's all about muscle memory.
I think we've all been there, haven't we? We poke around trying to find that line, or that square to come through, or that thread.
Yeah, and a great technique for practicing that is gold work, because if you're not accurate with where you bring your needle up, you're going to damage your work. So yeah, gold work is excellent for practicing your needle placement.
Yes, I'm sure. I mean, again, as I'm speaking to you, it must be physically quite demanding, because any amount of action that you do repetitively can cause you all sorts of aches and strains, can't it? How do you deal with that?
So when I first started on the course, I'd never worked on a slate frame before. I'd usually worked in hoops. And I had developed what I call hoop hunch, which is where when you're stitching, your shoulders come in and wrap around the hoop, and your head goes down and your neck goes down. And I used to end up with neck and shoulder pain. When you're working on a slate frame, it's a very different position. You're sort of bending from the waist, so it's more sort of the lower back. And it was a transition. I did have to have some quite intensive physiotherapy in my first sort of year to sort out muscle problems. But it's all about keeping your good posture. So don't hunch yourself around your hoop. Find a good position. So things like, if you're working on a hoop, having a seat frame or a barrel clamp, so that your hoop is in position, you can set it in somewhere that is not going to cause your shoulders to hunch, and you're not bending down, so that you can see more clearly. And working on a slate frame, you want to it's all about using your core muscles and bending from your core rather than using your back and your shoulders. But one of the things about working two-handed that helps is that you're not continuously moving your shoulder. So everything is happening from basically your elbows and your fingers and wrists, rather than moving the shoulder around, because for me, at least, that tends to be my weaker area. So yeah, getting used to it, having physio when you need to, finding a comfortable position, having a comfortable chair, and really good lighting as well is super important. So you should be, you need to be comfortable. If you're going to spend all day stitching, which I do, you need to be comfortable.
Mm-hmm. And just for the benefit of the listeners, could you explain what the difference is between an ordinary hoop and a slate frame?
Yeah, so, well, a hoop, I'm sure most people are familiar with hoops. You've got an inner and an outer, and you stretch the fabric across it. A slate frame is a very traditional way of stretching fabric. Confusingly, it has nothing to do with slate stone, which was something I wondered about when I first started. If you look at woodblock carvings of people embroidering or paintings of people embroidering going back hundreds and hundreds of years, they will be using something very similar to a slate frame. It is basically, it's made up of rollers and side arms. The rollers have some sort of like upholstery tape applied to them, and you sew the fabric onto each of the tapes, top and bottom, making sure it's lovely and on the grain and centered, all of that lovely stuff. And then those rollers have holes in them that you can put arms through, which are also generally sort of made out of beech, generally a hard wood. And they have holes in them as well, so that you can stretch the fabric so that it becomes really, really drum tight. And then we lace the sides as well. So you've got really tight tension from all four directions. So along the straight grain and the cross grain, you've got really, really tight tension. Once you've experienced the tension you get on a slate frame, it is very difficult to go back to a hoop, because you can literally bounce pennies off the top of a slate frame. You can get incredible tension. When people first frame up a slate frame, it will take them more than a day generally, but it's one of those things with practice you can get it down. I can frame up a sort of an 18-inch slate frame in about an hour these days. So it does become a lot quicker, and you get the most fabulous tension, and everything is flat. You don't have to worry about hoop marks. You do occasionally have to tighten it up, especially the strings along the side. You do need to maintain the tension in those, but there's nothing quite like it for working on.
So I'm assuming that the piece that you're embroidering would have a backing piece on it, would it? That would actually be attached to the top and bottom?
Yeah, so if I'm working on something like a silk or a velvet, for example, I'll frame up the slate frame with just some calico, and then I'll apply the fancy fabric onto the top. It means I have to use less of the expensive fabric as well, and it also creates a lovely backing for more delicate fabrics, so that you don't have to worry about the stitches being dense and then the fabric falling apart. If I was doing a canvas work piece or something on linen, then it would just be the same, the straight fabric that goes into the frame rather than two separate pieces.
So what happens if it's something very large? How do you cope with that in a slate frame?
You can get very large slate frames.
Okay.
So in the RSN studio, for example, they have frames that are probably antiques. I think the largest frames that they have are about 2.5 meters long.
Gosh, that's huge. How on earth do you support something that size?
They're reasonably self-supporting. You put them on trestles, and generally that's enough. The tension of the fabric sort of holds itself together. So big pieces worked on big frames. You can also there are ways of working on a smaller frame with bigger pieces, and you move the piece around basically, but that is a little trickier to do, but sometimes necessary.
And I'm assuming that you're not turning it over to start and finish thread. You're doing that from the front.
Yes, that is one of the reasons why at the RSN we are quite stern, if you like, about how to start and finish our threads. Because if you're working in a hoop, it's fairly easy to turn your frame over and to finish off your threads. If you're working on a 2.5 meter slate frame and you might have 6 other people working on that frame with you at the same time, you can't go, guys, can we just flip this over?
I'd like to be there for that.
That doesn't happen. So we start, as much as possible, we start and finish our threads on the top of the work cut away any knots. So there's never any knots left over on the piece because they get in the way and they create lumps and bumps. So yeah, so we as much as possible, we work entirely from the front of the fabric. There are always cases where you have to work on the back. So gold work, for example, if you've plunged a whole load of Japanese parting, for example, you eventually have to turn the frame over and deal with the ends on the back, but that will generally happen in one go. So there's just one turn and then it gets turned back again to do the rest.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more detail about how you finish threads on the front? Because again, I know it'll be something that will fascinate listeners.
Yeah, so we start and finish in pretty much the same way. So I'll start my thread, I'll thread up in my needle, I'll tie a knot in the end. There is no magic secret way of tying a knot in your thread. Any way that you can get a knot into the end of your thread is fine by me, as long as there is some sort of clump at the end that's not going to go straight through the fabric. It doesn't really matter how you tie your knot. But then I'll take the needle down through the fabric from the top, so the knot is on the surface of the fabric. You bring your needle up a little bit further away, maybe a couple of millimeters, somewhere that's not going to be seen. So usually on a design line or something like that, or an area that's going to be completely covered. A couple of tiny back stitches working towards where you're about to start stitching. Pull on the knot. If it moves, do another back stitch. If it's stationary, scissors underneath the knot and cut the knot away. And then you can start stitching, and you can pull on that. As long as the knot doesn't move, you can pull on that thread quite tightly and off you can go. Depending on the thread, you might need fewer or more stitches. And finishing off is basically the same. So you finish your stitching, you're coming to the end of your thread. You find somewhere that is going to be covered up later. Needle up where it's going to get hidden. Couple of tiny back stitches, nice and small, nice and tight. Bring the thread back out to the front of the work and then snip it away nice and close to the fabric with your scissors. The trick is to hold a little bit of tension in the thread before you cut it, and that means that the little tail bounces back onto the reverse of the fabric. It does get trickier when you're getting towards the end of a piece where there's nowhere left to finish off on the front. So as RSN studio stitchers or tutors, we can usually find stitches that we can hide finishing stitches underneath. That can be a little bit risky, however. So for my students, particularly beginner students, that's usually where I'll say, when you're towards the end of the piece, you can turn it over onto the back.
You can cheat.
You can weave back on the back. I'd rather folks, until they build up their confidence in doing their finishing stitches, I'd rather they do that than risk damaging the work that they might have spent many hours working on. So it's once you're confident, you can always find somewhere to finish on the front. But when you're starting out, just at those ends where you've got basically there's nowhere else, it's the last few stitches of your piece, that's when you can turn it over and weave back on the back.
And does that apply for all stitches? I'm thinking about things like black work, for instance. Is that easy to finish on the front?
So for black work or areas for stitches techniques where you're not necessarily covering all of the fabric, the weaving back method is generally what we do. So when we're working on a big piece in the studio, because again, we can't keep turning it over, we'll just park the threads out of the way. And then what I'll often do at the end of a stitching session, rather than finishing off every thread as I get to the end of it, my piece by the end of a stitching session will look rather hairy with starting knots and ending tails. And then it's something I really like to do at the end of a day. I still want to be getting some work done, but the brain and the eyes are maybe not as fresh as they could be. So that's when I'll spend some time dealing with the ends and weaving in on the back. So for black work and canvas, it's usually a bit different. So one of the advantages of the RSN training is that I can turn my hand to any of the sort of the techniques that we work on, but my favorite is definitely gold work, to the point where I'll do other techniques and I'll just have to put something shiny into it to add on to it, because I really love the look of it. I love the whole technique of it. It involves a lot of precision and really interesting materials. And my eye is always drawn to gold work pieces. I was possibly a magpie in a previous life. I just really like shiny things.
Yes, yeah. And actually it's a really different set of techniques, isn't it?
Two stitches in gold work, you're either going over something and couching it down, or you're going through it and beading it. But there's so many subtleties and differences, and it basically, I enjoy it because it's a problem solving exercise. So every time you come to do a piece of gold work, it's always a little bit different, and there's lots of problem solving and figuring things out, how to make it look good, sort of following the rules, but there's lots of aesthetic choices as well as technical choices, and I love the challenge of it.
Mm. It's interesting that our students also love gold work, and it's one of the things that they will ask as they're doing course, will I cover gold work? But over time, I've noticed that the number of suppliers for the specialist threads have dwindled and dwindled. I wonder if you found that, and if you have any tips for where to actually obtain threads from.
Yeah, so in the UK, there are now just 2 producers of gilt metal threads, so the traditional threads for English gold work. There's Golden Threads and Benton and Johnson, and the demand is still reasonably high, and they are literally 2 individual people who make them. So it is becoming more and more challenging in terms of supply to be able to get those threads, particularly the traditional gilt metal threads, because the wire is becoming more and more expensive because of the price of gold and the price of copper. So it is getting more difficult to get hold of threads. There are other places that produce similar threads to use in goldwork embroidery. There's a big tradition of goldwork embroidery in France, and there's also a big tradition of goldwork embroidery in India and Japan. So you can get threads from those countries. They are slightly different. So they use slightly different materials and slightly different production techniques because they use them in slightly different ways. But that can be a good way of getting hold of a cheaper option for goldwork threads, because a lot of them do not have the gold content, which obviously is the thing that pushes the price up. So yeah, you can source threads from elsewhere. But yeah, it is getting harder. A lot of my RSN colleagues, they sell goldwork threads via their websites. The main place, I think, in the UK at least, for getting smaller quantities of goldwork threads, so not like me where you're buying them in bulk for making kits and things like that, is somewhere like Golden Hind. They have a great selection of threads, lots of different colours as well. So they use some of the Indian embroidery threads as well as English embroidery threads. And they're also extremely knowledgeable. So they're quite a good source. Sarah Humphrey is one of my colleagues who also has a good shop for goldwork threads. But yeah, it is getting a little tricky to get hold of them, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's such a shame. It's such a shame, isn't it? But if you're using so many that you're getting them in bulk, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, so I say most of my work is teaching, and I do quite a lot of day classes, both for the RSN and outside of the RSN. And a lot of my kits are goldwork based because it's my favourite, and so that's often what I choose to teach. So yeah, so I have a large stock of gold threads, which I enjoy sometimes just opening up and looking at because why not? But yeah, I spend a lot of time putting kits together.
So could someone come to your site and purchase gold
I
threads?
don't currently sell the threads individually, but I do sell them as part of kits rather than the individual threads. I don't really have the setup at the moment to be able to do the threads individually. It's very, very logistically complicated, it turns out.
Yes, I could imagine. So can you tell us anything about what it is that you're working on at the moment? What's your current project?
So yes, I'm usually working on multiple pieces at one time, but the major piece I'm working on at the moment is for an exhibition that's going to be held in 2025 by the Worshipful Company of Broderers. So this is the second exhibition of embroidery that they've run recently. And full disclosure, I am a liveryman of the company, so I'm a member of the group. So they're the original guild, if you like, the medieval guild in the City of London for embroidery. So they're holding an exhibition in 2025, and I've got a piece on my frame for that, started, ready to go. I just need to find the time to work on it. But it's in gold work on velvet. So for the last exhibition, I did a map of London in gold work. So it looks like London as you fly over it, coming into land at Heathrow, for example. So with lots of glistening lights and things like that. And this time, so I did London for the last exhibition, and for the next exhibition, I'm doing the same thing for New York. So I'm slowly working around sort of iconic cities, seeing them from above in gold work. So I'm really, really looking forward to carrying on working on that. So.
That sounds fascinating. When you're looking for inspiration for a piece, where is it that you go? Where do you find your inspiration from?
Ooh, I wish I knew the answer to that question, to be honest. It's one of those things that I don't really know always. Sometimes it's really obvious. So I'll go to an exhibition, I will look at a painting or a historic textile, or I'll go into if I'm working on a class for the Royal School of Needlework, I might go and look into their collection pieces and gain some inspiration from that. But the idea for doing the map of London came from a gallery. I was on holiday in Japan, and there were some dot paintings. So similar to Australian Aboriginal paintings of dot paintings. And I looked at them and I thought, that would work really well for chipping in goldwork technique. I could sort of create something quite similar. And then we left Japan, we flew back, we flew over London, and it was dark. And I went, oh, that's a good idea. Like, that would make an excellent embroidery. Yeah. So yeah, sometimes it's, it feels like they come to me in dreams. Sometimes I'm inspired by a pattern, like a tile pattern or a building or anything. But I'd love to know where the ideas come from. Thankfully, they keep coming. Sometimes I have not enough, and sometimes I have too many, but keep writing them down, and sometimes I get around to them and sometimes I don't. I think it's quite lucky that in embroidery, things happen relatively slowly. So, I was working in watercolours. I need a lot more ideas a lot more often, but I usually have at least sort of 3 or 4 ideas on the go at one time. So another thing I'm working on is a class that I'm going to start teaching hopefully in September, which is basically a smaller version of a goldwork map for my students. And I'm also thinking about an idea at the moment for this year's Hand and Lock Prize for embroidery. So I've started doing a little bit of sampling for that. Whether I actually find the time to actually work it to enter, I haven't decided yet. But hopefully I'll be submitting something for that as well.
It must be really quite difficult to manage your time because, as you say, some of these pieces are large and they're obviously going to be a big time commitment. How do you go about sort of making sure that you're not overcommitting or undercommitting?
One of the things that we do as part of our training is estimating how long things are going to take. So when we do each of our pieces in our first 2 years, we always write down how long we've spent on each individual area. So I spent an hour and a half framing up. I spent 2 hours designing it. Usually more than that designing it, but and it took me half an hour to transfer the design onto the fabric, for example, and then you break down the stitching areas into that. So you start to get a good idea of how long things take. The more you do, the shorter those timelines get. But you're always thinking about how long is this going to take me? How many hours? What can I fit in? And then we do the same when we go into the commercial studio. Everything we do, we time it. We write down how much material we've used, how long we spent on different things. We take photographs as we go along as well, so you can see the work in progress. And that helps you to build up a model of approximately how long things are going to take you. And we also do exercises in terms of looking at a piece and estimating as part of our training so that you can quote for things. So that is really helpful. But yeah, sometimes I work as a freelancer, so it is a bit feast or famine. Sometimes I'm fairly quiet and I can sort of potter along and work on art pieces and things like that because I don't have any urgent deadlines. And other times it's a little bit more hectic and I'll be working longer hours than usual to try and fit things in. So far, I haven't had any major disasters with my time planning, but I'm not sure whether that's luck or judgment.
Yeah. I imagine that it's a bit of a compromise, isn't it? Because you can look at something and perhaps the way you originally think that you'll do it would take too long. So you have to make adjustments.
Yeah, certainly when you're working on, especially things like commission pieces, you're very aware of the time things are taking because that's effectively how you're going to charge back to your client. So often when I'm quoting for things for commissions, for example, I will give the client options in terms of, we could do this in silk shading, for example, and that's going to take you that will take me approximately this long, which would translate to approximately this amount of money. Or we could do something that's more applique based, maybe involving some machine embroidery as well, and then I can give people more cost effective options for things. So that's one way of doing it. When it comes to designing classes, I have a sort of a general rule, which is that, for example, if I'm going to teach it in a single day's teaching, I need to be able to stitch it in the time it would take the class to run. It seems to be quite a good approximation. I'm not expecting my students to finish stitching in that time. I will be quicker than them, but it's sort of a good rough guide, I find, for going, okay, if it takes me 5 hours to stitch it, I can probably teach it in about 5 hours.
Yeah, because they'll work in between,
yes,
won't they?
So they'll, especially with online classes now, it's great because I can give people homework. So I don't have to say, so it works particularly well for things like gold work or white work, where there's quite a lot of preparation to do before you can go on to the next piece. So for gold work, you can't put the gold on until you've finished your padding because the gold goes on top of the padding. So being able to say, okay, this week we're going to look at padding, and then you've got a week and we're going to come back and then we're going to start couching over the top of it. The ability to do online classes has really transformed what you're able to teach people, and it's allowed us to start teaching a broader range of techniques because people can go off in between and do some work.
And it must have been quite an adjustment, I suppose, to take some of these techniques online rather than teach them in person.
Yes. So in some ways, I think it's easier, and in some ways it's more difficult. So one of the things I miss in online teaching versus in-person teaching is that it's really, really difficult for me to see what people are doing as they're doing it. So I can't spot, for example, that someone's using too long a thread in their needle, or if they're holding their hoop in an uncomfortable way. So that makes it quite tricky because I don't know what they're doing. But if they send me, so I've had to sort of learn to reverse engineer problems. So you can look at so if someone sends you a photograph of their piece, for example, you can go, your thread's gone a little bit fluffy towards the end there. You're probably using too long a thread in that, or your edge has gone a little bit wobbly. So maybe there was a problem with your split stitch, for example. So you have to sort of be able to like reverse engineer the problems. And I often sort of think about, if I was in an in-person class, what are the likely things that I would see depending on the level that I'm teaching? So for beginners, it's usually your stitches probably want to be a little bit smaller and a little bit tighter, because most beginners go for slightly too long stitches and they don't have a tight enough tension. So you have to sort of play it in your mind as to what you would expect to see if you were teaching in person. On the other hand, certainly from a student point of view, when I'm doing an online class, I have an overhead camera. It's focused on my hoop or my frame. They can see me stitching from my eye view, which is great because in an in-person class, I can go round and I can demonstrate, but there's there's always people who end up at the front and get a great view. And there's always people who end up at the back who maybe can't see it quite as clearly. So from that perspective, everyone gets to be able to see exactly the same thing. And often I'll keep the overhead camera on whilst I'm stitching in between demonstrations, whilst folks are doing their own stitching. And it means that they can glance up at the screen and they can see physically what I'm doing, even if I can't see what they're doing.
How do you go on with somebody that's left-handed?
For someone who's left-handed, a lot of stitches work basically the same, but I can work not entirely ambidextrously, but I can demonstrate left and right-handed. So it's always a question that I ask at the beginning of my classes. I don't ask people to put their hand up if they're left-handed. I ask them specifically, are you right or left-handed? So that then they don't feel called out like it's a bad thing, because left-handed embroiderers, just as talented and amazing as right-handed embroiderers, it's not a problem. It's just something that is helpful for me to know. So I'll say things like, if you're right-handed, you'll probably find it easier to start on the left and work to the right. And if you're left-handed, you'll probably find it easier to start on the right and work to the left, or clockwise or anti-clockwise, or whatever it happens to be. And for the stitches that are specifically different, I will usually demonstrate it both ways as well.
Mm-hmm. Because I think left-handed embroiderers do have quite a lot to overcome, don't they, when they're first learning. If they've persevered and obviously got to the point where they're joining one of your classes, they must be very committed.
I think so. One of the things there's two things that I'd really recommend for left-handed embroiderers. One is, so we have the RSN Stitch Bank, which has launched about a year and a half ago. And for each of those stitches, they have a reverse view. So you can flip over the diagrams and the photographs so that you can see it from a left-handed perspective, which is really, really useful. And there's also a book by Yvette Stanton, which is The Left-Handed Embroiderer's Companion, I believe it's called, which again is really, really helpful. I believe she is left-handed, so she writes really well as a left-hander to be able to explain those differences. So for left-handed embroiderers, something I would really recommend having a look at. I think all her books, she demonstrates her stitches as left and right-handed as well.
Those are fantastic tips. Thank you. So what's well, I'm not personally left-handed, but I know that quite a significant percentage of people are. So it's obviously very helpful for them. What's for coming in the future? What is it that you do have? I know you've discussed one exhibition, but do you have other plans for the business or for courses, or what's coming up next for you?
What's coming up next for me? That's a good question. So I'm working on, I've got one piece on the frame already for the Broderers Exhibition in 2025. I have another piece that's still sitting in my head that I need to get onto paper and fabric to be able to start working on that, because the time is going. I basically carrying on teaching. So I now teach. So I teach at Hampton Court Palace on alternative Fridays for the certificate and diploma course. So I'm carrying on with that. This summer, I'm stitching at and teaching at the Royal School of Needlework's International Summer School. So we are heading off to the US in July to teach lots of different classes. I've got 2 classes that I'm teaching there, which I'm really looking forward to. So I've got a gold work class, which is quite advanced, which is as a crown, because you've got to do a crown in gold work. It seems like the obvious choice. And then I'm also doing a beginner's sort of level crewel work class as well. So, which is a new class. So one of my immediate jobs in the next few weeks is to write the instructions for it, having already stitched it. So there's quite a few things going on. I'm also trying to start moving some of my classes into sort of on-demand video classes, so that I'll record versions of my day classes and have those available as videos, so people, rather than having to turn up at a particular time or a particular day, that they can do those self-paced when they want to. But that's a sort of a more long-term plan that I'd like to do.
Yeah, that's quite an undertaking, isn't it? That amount of video work.
It is.
It'll
It's one
take
of
a
the things
while.
about being a professional embroiderer. You think you'll spend all of your time stitching, but I spend as much time stitching as I do taking photographs of my work, editing videos, recording videos, writing instructions, drawing diagrams, doing the accounts. So yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to do the training is to get really,
Yes.
really good at one thing, but you also need to be a jack of all trades.
You do, don't you? I mean, I know myself. I think people have the impression that you spend all day curled up in an armchair with an embroidery hoop in your hand. And
No.
it's not like that. You have to really get out, and you have to sell yourself, sell the business. You obviously have the boring stuff like accounts to do and all of that. In actual fact, it's a completely different skill set, isn't it? How did you find? I mean, obviously your training prepared you, but it is still quite a leap, isn't it, to get out there and
It
have
is.
to do all
There's
of
a lot
those
of things that you need to know, and a lot of things you've got to be on top of all of the time. I'm very lucky that my background before I came to the RSN, I worked in procurement, basically. So I know how to source materials. I know how to price things up. I know how to work within budgets. That was my bread and butter as part of my corporate life. So when it came to translating that into my embroidery life, that was a relatively easy step. Becoming self-employed, there's so many rules. That was a little bit more complicated, but yeah, so I knew how to manage inventory and things like that. And in fact, now I teach. In fact, I'm currently teaching the second and third year future tutors on the program at the moment. I teach them business skills. So in fact, in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be teaching them what we call commercial kit making. So things that you need to be aware of in terms of pricing things up, sourcing things, where to buy things, how to work out how much to charge. So it's an interesting sort of link in terms of my previous life and my new life, and then being able to pass on those skills to other embroiderers so that when they start their businesses, all those things that I thought about and had to develop, I can pass on to them as well.
I know one of the things, or just as I've been chatting to you, one of the things that I know I will be in real trouble with the listeners if I don't ask is how you actually go about, what are the practicalities of going onto the RSN course? I mean, I assume it's pretty difficult to get onto. And then do you have to pay fees? Are you funded? I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit about it before everybody piles on and starts to.
So there's an application process that opens every year. They take on, I believe, things have slightly changed recently, but a maximum of 6 students in each year. Sometimes it's fewer than 6, sometimes it's 6. And basically, they're looking for people with enthusiasm more than anything else, people who are looking specifically to teach embroidery rather than necessarily work in fashion or something like that. So we have the RSN degree program, which is sort of more focused in sort of working in fashion, working in costume and things like that. So the tutors program is very much more focused on folks who want to keep the traditional skills alive and pass them on. So the key things are an enthusiasm for the subject and having good fine motor control. You don't necessarily have to have had lots of embroidery experience before you join the course. The more you have, the more helpful it is. I was somewhere in the middle, I would say, in terms of experience. I'd done a lot of self-taught embroidery, but I hadn't done, for example, some other folks I joined with had done the certificate and diploma program before. So we're more in tune with the sort of the Royal School of Needlework house style, if you like, and their methods. I had to unlearn lots of things as well as learning lots of things. So bad habits that I had got into, for example, like licking the end of my thread, I had to unlearn doing that. So there's a bit of a balance. So you don't want to have in terms of level of experience, I say generally the more embroidery experience you have, the better, but be aware you may have to unlearn habits that you have gotten into over time. But yeah, enthusiasm, a passion for the subject, a willingness to learn. And there's an application process. You're asked to provide a CV, a cover letter, the usual sorts of things. And I believe there's a questionnaire as well. And then usually you'll submit a portfolio of work as well. But it doesn't have to be just embroidery. If you've got a different art background, that can go into your portfolio as well. So they're just looking for people with a passion for the subject and a willingness to learn. In terms of fees, it is a course that you pay for. There are grants and bursaries available, but it's not necessarily a cheap course to do. However, as part of the new program that they've just launched, every year there is going to be one fully funded place that people can apply for, especially for those folks who are maybe a little bit younger, because there is no government support. It's not a degree program, so you can't get a student loan. So I think that's a really great thing that they've done with this new program, that there'll be one place per year that will be fully funded for someone to come and join.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's changed or not, but there used to be an upper age limit. Is that still in place?
There used to be an upper age limit for when it was an apprenticeship program, because there were specific rules about apprenticeships. I'm not sure whether there's a formal upper age limit. I was over 35. So yeah, there is not necessarily an upper limit, but bearing in mind as well, you want to have a reasonable working life beyond. I will imagine I'll be doing this for a very long time. We have Elizabeth Elvin, who was the principal of the RSN, and she's still assessing for us. I couldn't possibly tell you exactly how old she is. That would be rude. But she's still going with us. So yeah, people have long careers with the RSN.
Yeah, it sounds as though there's a real spirit of camaraderie as well between all of the tutors.
We're all very different people. We've got different backgrounds. Some of us folks who joined on the apprenticeship program possibly came straight from school and straight into working in embroidery. Others of us have had previous careers and are a little bit older when we come into it, but we all speak the same language. So one of the things that was lovely about working on the coronation pieces is that I saw folks that I'd not worked with before, or maybe I hadn't seen for a really long time. And sometimes, the room would be very quiet. We're all very focused on our work. And then we'd have an hour-long conversation about scissors, because we're all interested in the same thing. So, and there's always this link in terms of we're all very passionate about what we do. We all really enjoy embroidery and textiles and art, and some of us have different approaches and different styles and things like that, but we all can work in the house style of the RSN. We can all come back and share stories about our times in training, because it is an intensive course. Everyone's got their war stories and you can hear about them, and it's just so lovely to be in a room working with so many talented people at the same time, but knowing although you're very different people, sometimes you've got so much in common as well. So it's really lovely, and it's so lovely to be able to be able to call upon this amazing collective memory. If you've got a question that a student has asked you and you're not sure, someone will know the answer. And it's so great to be able to have that sort of hive mind to go back to and go, I just had this really odd question. Does anyone know?
Yeah.
Someone will know.
Yes, yeah, no, I'm sure. Oh, Sarah, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that our listeners will be absolutely enthralled.
Thank you. It's been really lovely. I hope I've made sense.
You have absolutely made sense.